Welcome to the Mennonite Heritage Archives. My name is Conrad Stoesz and I'm the archivist here. I really enjoy my job. I love my job because it's all about stories. In my job, I learn something old every day. Here at the archives, we've been collecting the story about Mennonites since 1933. And if you stack all the papers on top of each other, it's higher than the CN Tower, over half a kilometer of paper records. So that's a lot of stuff. And my job is to help people find things in this collection and to add to it and to create ways of finding things in this mountain of material. In the Mennonite Heritage Archives, we also have a gallery. The gallery is separate from the archives, but currently in the gallery there is a photo exhibit of pictures from Mennonite life in Manitoba, from the villages, from around 1910 to 1940. A lot of the images come from our archives. They're on glass negatives, so they're about this size, but then we've blown them up to life size. So they're really striking images. So we have a wide variety of materials here at the archives, different kind of documents documenting Mennonite life in Prussia, which is now Poland, in Russia, Ukraine, in Canada, Mexico, and Paraguay. So we have a wide variety of materials. They come from individuals, families, they come from congregations, from groups of congregations, sometimes called conferences, and from organizations that have Mennonite connections. So all these kind of documents are here in the archives to be used and to document the Mennonite experience. Archives is a memory institution along with libraries and museums, and it's very important for group identity, group knowledge, to keep records of their past, of their experiences. One of the documents that we have here is one of my favorites, and what I think is one of the most important documents, is a letter from the Canadian government. This is a letter from the Canadian government in 1873 saying, enticing Mennonites to come to Canada, to come to Manitoba. This document explains why there are Mennonites in Manitoba, in Western Canada. This document says, if you come to Manitoba, Mennonites were then living in what was called South Russia. If you come to Manitoba, we'll give you land, you have freedom of religion, you will not have to serve in the military, and you can conduct schools as you see fit. So there's 15 points here. So on the basis of this letter, 7,000 Mennonites moved from Ukraine, South Russia, between 1874 and 1880, settling in 2 blocks of land reserved for their settlement in what's called the East Reserve, which is near Steinbach, and the West Reserve, which is near Altona-Winkler area. So this document explains why there are Mennonites in Western Canada. Some Mennonites went to the United States, but this document provided assurances around education and religion that the United States couldn't. So some went to the United States, but this document provided additional assurances that the Mennonites found important. But this document also explains why there are Mennonites in Mexico. So this document, item number 10, talks about you have the freedom to conduct schools as you see fit. But in the wake of World War I, there was a lot of anti-German sentiments. Immigration to Canada was actually barred for Mennonites. In 1919, the federal government says, we don't want any more Mennonites in this country. You cannot come. And there was restrictions on using the German language. And provincial governments in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, began instituting laws saying you had to send your children to public school. There were people in the provinces in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, politicians who said, these Mennonites are not assimilating the way we want them to. They're not supporting the government. They don't have the values we want them to have. So how are we going to change that? Well, they decided the adults they're not going to change their minds. They're a lost cause in a sense. But we can change their children. So that's why they started these public schools, that they had to go to the public school. The Mennonites resisted, saying, hey, we have this federal document that says we can do schools as we see fit. The question wasn't about, is education important? Of course education is important. The question was, who was doing the educating? Is it the state that's doing the educating, or is it the home and the church? And so for some Mennonites, they believed it's the home and the church, and we're not going to change that. The government doubled down. They started fining these people who didn't send their children to schools. They confiscated their farm machinery, their animals, even their food, and they sent them to prison. In Saskatchewan alone, there were 5,000 prosecutions in a few short years. So the matter went to court. The Mennonites used this document to plead their case. In the end, they lost because this is a federal document, and yet education is a provincial matter. So the Mennonites, some thought, well, we can accommodate this. We can find other ways of maintaining our culture and our values. But other Mennonites said, no, Canada's not a good home for us, so we gotta leave. And so while they were looking for a place to leave, they pleaded with the the Saskatchewan and Manitoba governments, stop prosecuting us, we're on our way out, we're gonna leave. But the government went on fining and confiscating materials and property. So in the end, about 7,000 moved to Mexico and Paraguay between 1922 and 1926. And that's why there are Mennonites in Mexico, because, again, of this document. So that's 100 years ago this year. So that's this document. And each document in this collection can tell a story. And that's one of the things I love about my job, is all the stories that these documents tell. And they're stories about, yeah, the leaders, but also the everyday person is also documented here. It says here, Tagebuch, Daybook. It starts in 1824. And this is written in High German, but it's also used, written in the German Gothic script. So how they create the letters is actually different. So even a person from Germany would have a hard time reading this because the letters are created differently. Luckily, we've had people translate the diary for us. And so this is one example of a diary that we have. So we get a chance to understand what life was like in 1824 in a different country. So there was a man by the name of Johannes Dick. He was a wealthy man. He lived in the Amtrak settlement in Russia. And he had a large family. And things were getting more and more difficult and harder to leave. It was becoming more and more expensive. And the government didn't want these people to leave, so put more and more barriers in place, making it harder to leave, including that you couldn't take a lot of money out of the country. Dick was at a community meeting. He writes in his diary, he was at a community meeting where all different representatives came from a large area. And someone he calls the president stood at the front of the meeting in this large building and said, we want to welcome the Communist Party and its programs to this region. And we want everybody to agree to this. Is there any discussion about this? And a lot of hands shut up and said, yeah, I want to talk about that. I don't like that idea. And then the president called a recess. And then everyone was called back, and the president said, all right, again, so we want to welcome the Communist Party to this area. Are there anyone who wants to speak against this? And then he snapped his fingers, and the curtain behind him fell. And there were 4 machine guns trained at the audience. And no one raised their hand. And Johannes Dick said, it is time to get out. So he got all his documents in place, and he had his family. He had 4 or 5 children and his wife. As they got on the train, he gave his youngest daughter, Rena, this doll. This became Rena's favorite doll. And Rena hung onto the doll on the train, and on the train at one of the checkpoints, some of the people, officials, were a little suspicious of the Dick family. So they pulled the Dick family off the train, and they said, okay, the boys and the men go into this room, and the girls and women go into that room. And Rena left the doll in the waiting room under the bench. And they were all told to take off all their clothes, and they were strip searched. And their clothing was inspected for high currency, for money. And they didn't find any. So they were allowed to go, and Rena went back out into the waiting room, picked up her doll, and on the way they went to Canada. It was only later, when Johannes felt it was safe, did he tell the family what he had done. He had stuffed the doll with high currency American dollars. And so in Canada, he was able to buy a farm and buy a farm machinery. He was really well off in 1927 compared to other families. And I tell this story because I'm not exactly sure what to do with this story. Is this a story about a clever man who fooled the Russian officials? Or is this a story about a greedy man who put him, his family, and the whole immigration movement at risk? I don't really know the answer to that story. Was he greedy or was he smart? But it highlights the fact that history is not simple. History is complicated. History is exciting and interesting as well. Now, Johannes' son, Peter, as an adult, becomes a key figure after World War II in helping bring thousands and thousands of Mennonites out of war-torn Europe to Canada and Paraguay. So if Johannes would not have made it out to Canada, Peter would not have been around to help with that wave of immigration as well. So it's interesting.